Good evening and welcome to Chris Smith Tonight. Good to have your company. This is just episode number 3, so thank you so much for being part of the genesis of what I'm hoping will be a significant part of the current affairs landscape in this country. This is your new home for news with guts and opinions without fear. Tonight, the $600 billion education flop. Why academic outcomes in the classroom have failed another generation of our children. We'll be hearing from acclaimed curriculum expert Dr. Kevin Donnelly on what's still so wrong and how we can possibly make it right. Our news panellists tonight include best-selling author and disruptor Alex Malley, a National Director of Family First, and one of my colleagues here at ADH, Lyle Shelton. We'll be tackling the issue of Gaza visas, which the Coalition wants to ban immediately. An Albo's Made in Australia bill facing huge opposition in the Parliament, and rightly so. Also tonight, it's just 10 weeks to go before Queenslanders go to the polls. Political journalist Adam Walters will tell us whether the race is already over. And we'll cross to London too for our regular report from Blighty. The team from Spiked has the latest on what has been almost 2 weeks of violent rioting over immigration. A busy show ahead. Let's get started. You know, sometime between now and the next federal election, one of the major parties, probably both, will tell us how many more billions of dollars they're going to throw at education to solve the crisis. Does that ring a bell? It should, because it's been standard practice for 20 years in this country to throw money at our schools and think that this will save our kids' education. In fact, through the Gonski funding, taxpayers have added another $600 billion to the pot in just 11 years. That's about $60 billion more per year. Billions, not millions. And today we can accurately conclude that it's been a total, unmitigated disaster. Truckloads of money, no longer the answer, I'm sorry. And when political leaders promise billions more very soon, treat them with the disdain they deserve. Here are the facts. Thousands of New South Wales students have failed to meet basic benchmarks in the latest round of NAPLAN testing. 1 in 3 students performed below expectations in this year's literacy and numeracy exams, while 40% of Year 9 children failed grammar and punctuation tests. Nothing has changed in 12 months, nothing. And this is upsetting. 1/3 of students failed to meet the baseline standard in reading, numeracy and spelling. What kind of future is in store for them? In Victoria, NAPLAN reveals that nearly 30% of school children are also struggling with literacy and numeracy. They're falling through the cracks everywhere. 29.3%, or about 88,000 of the 300,000 Victorian youngsters who sat the test this year, rated as either developing or needing additional support. In other words, they are struggling. And what's the National Curriculum Authority, ACARA, saying about this crisis? It praised the important achievement of students and teachers in keeping results stable. Stable, all right, but it's a stability of failure. Who's ACARA trying to kid? Here's how the Federal Education Minister tried to spin it today.
Well, I think they show why serious reform's needed in our schools. We've got a good education system. I want to underline that point. But what they show is that it can be a lot better and it can be a lot fairer. Just to be clear here, what it shows is there's about 1 in 10 children who sit these tests that are below what we call, or what we used to call, the minimum standard. But it's 1 in 3 kids from poor families. It's 1 in 3 kids from the bush. It's 1 in 3 Indigenous kids. In other words, your parents' pay packet, where you live, the colour of your skin affects your chances in life.
Oh, come on, Jason Clare. It's a crisis. It's a disaster. Nothing has changed despite the $60 billion extra in Gonski funding in 12 months. Now, shortly, I'm going to ask some real expert to unpack what needs to be done urgently to save Australian children from slipping further. But let me throw a few pointers in the direction of our education boffins who've made a masterclass out of destroying the futures of our children. Don't ever ask for more money again. It's quality, not quantity, that counts. The system of teaching and reinforcement is all wrong. Fix it. Don't just replicate a bad system. 2, unclutter the maze of curriculum requirements. Weed out the left-wing ideology and sexual identity classes. That's a parent's job. And stick hard to the basics. And 3, whether you like it or not, boys and girls must be taught differently. Look at the latest literature and stop moralising about the need for equality. I say that because NAPLAN 24 proves that in the first year of high school, twice as many boys than girls are unable to read and write at the basic level. And parents, surprise, surprise, what you do at home in creating a regimen of study and commitment is still a major factor in educational outcomes. Leaving your kids to fend for themselves is another recipe for failure. For a first world nation with limitless money to dedicate to education and a bureaucracy the size of some governments around the world, we are so pathetic at learning the lessons of the past. Joining us now to dive deep into what exactly the government has been spending our money on is author, educator and commentator Dr. Kevin Donnelly. Welcome to the program, Kevin. What a terrible result these NAPLAN outcomes have been.
Well, Chris, abysmal. And you and I have spoken about this over a couple of years. Nothing's changed. I wrote a book, Why Our Schools Are Failing, over 20 years ago. And guess what? 30% of kids were failing literacy tests. It was happening back then. Numeracy was even worse. Despite the additional billions that's been invested, nothing has got any better. And what staggers me is that governments, and I'll have to say Liberal and Labor governments,
Yes,
have been responsible for that. And the Australian Education Union, all they can say is, give us more money, more money, more money. But we know it doesn't work.
well, it doesn't work to the tune of $600 billion. This is the Gonski money that has been thrown and ploughed into education in Australia over 10 and a half years. 600 billion, not million, and we've got nothing to show for it. What do we have to show for it?
Well, as you know, we're going down the international, the league table internationally in terms of PISA, PIRLS, TIMS. They're international tests that look at literacy, numeracy, science, reading. We used to be in the top 8 or 10. Now we're down to 20, even lower. So in those international tests, we're always outperformed by countries like, in Europe, like Finland, but also, I hate to say it, the UK's doing better than we are. New Zealand did better for a while. Obviously, China, Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, they're always in the top 4 or 5. So when you look at the international testing, we're going down the Googler, as I say, and NAPLAN, similarly, we haven't got any better. When I co-chaired the review of the national curriculum in 2014, we knew this was a problem, and we actually recommended that we get back to phonics and phonemic awareness. We teach grammar, spelling, punctuation. We get kids to memorise times tables in primary school, dates, events, recite poetry. You have to, if you like, hardwire the brain with all of that information and knowledge before you can go on and be more creative.
Yeah, exactly. 1 in 3 students aren't meeting mathematics and English standards. So where are schools going wrong? Apart from what you suggested in 2014, which I've got to say begrudgingly the New South Wales Education Department has agreed to return to phonics, so that's a start. But for most of what goes on in school, if you're ploughing $600 billion into it, it's obviously a system that needs to change. Not the dollars that we throw at education, the system needs to change.
It does, and when you look at surveys of teachers, as you know, we have a very high attrition rate, and there's a shortage of teachers around Australia, especially in mathematics and science, and that's only making the problem worse. But we have a high attrition rate. Beginning teachers generally only stay for 4 or 5 years, and there are a number of problems there. One is it's a very bureaucratic system, full of red tape. It's always ticking the boxes. We've got federal government, we've got state government, territory governments, all telling teachers what to do, telling schools what to do. So there's too much red tape, too much bureaucracy. And as you know, we have among the highest rates of disruption, badly behaved students in the classroom. So we've got the problem with student behaviour or bad discipline, if you like, assessment and reporting regime, which is too complicated, red tape and bureaucracy, and also parents are responsible as well, and I have to say that.
I was going to raise that, but why don't we do it now, seeing that you've mentioned them? Shouldn't parents make sure, no matter what the pressures of life, the cost of living strains are, they've got to ensure that a study regime is in place after kids get home from school or sport, and it's followed through with, and there's reading going on at every juncture? Too many parents are allowing that to slip, aren't they?
They are, and when you look at the international research about why some kids do a lot better than others, one of the primary factors is the number of books in the home. Now, I know a lot of parents, and I see it every day, you do as well, in restaurants, out having lunch or a coffee. The kids are at the table with their iPads and
Yes.
their iPhones, and they're not talking to their parents. Often the parents are even worse. We have to get children away from the screens,
Yep.
the computers, the iPhones. We have to get back to the printed word, showing kids what a picture book is, getting them to look at print, reading to your children. I mean, we did that with our kids every day since they were 4 or 5 years old. And we also have to understand that with children, you need to get them out. It's funny. There's a correlation between learning to catch a ball or to kick a footy or a soccer ball and being able to read and write and do mathematics. It's all about hand-eye coordination and about programming the mind to be able to do these basic skills. And once you're able to do that, being able to even just physically write, rather than using a keyboard is important as well. But if you get all those basics right before kids go to school, when they're 4 or 5 or 6 years old, that will help them throughout their schooling.
I've got to say, seeing that you're the expert on woke, how much woke material are kids faced with in the classroom? You're hearing it from parents who hear from their children when they get home from school about the ideology that they've been inflicted with or contaminated by. That kind of stuff has got to stop. That's up to parents, isn't it?
Parents are mobilising, and we saw that in Florida, in America. We saw it in Virginia as well. A number of states, Texas is another one. Parents are pressuring politicians to actually legislate to stop teachers indoctrinating children, to stop teachers, teaching all of this Black Lives Matter, sustainability, environment, anti-Israel. And that's happening in America. I think it might start to happen here. But I'll give you one example. The Victorian English teachers had a meeting earlier this year where they talked about the voice, Indigenous affairs, and they argued that forget about whether you're going to vote yes or no, forget about what happens. We must get children in the classroom committed to reconciliation, to the fact that we invaded, we stole the land. And this is English teachers. You think they'd be more worried about spelling, punctuation, grammar, poetry, good literature.
Just pathetic. Pathetic. That's the kind of stuff that has to be weeded out as well. I've run out of time, but Dr. Kevin Donnelly, thank you very much for yours. You were brilliant.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, Kevin Donnelly, always a great analyst when it comes to the vagaries and problems that seem to beset education in this country.